Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, I thought that I would talk about this topic that I found very particularly interesting. And before overall I really go into this, I just thought that I would say this that when it comes to me posting overall a certain amount of boxing news or boxing topics overall, within these next coming weeks, I'm probably not going to post as much until the month of April hits, or at least all in all until these next couple of weeks. We'll see what happens. But the reason why I say that is because all in all, I don't want to be doing a lot of videos on some of the same topics. Of course, I like doing videos sometimes on similar topics, maybe to expose certain narratives, at least ones that I find to be double standards. But when it comes down to it, all in all, I'm probably not going to be posting as much overall, at least until the month of April, or until some of these bigger fights happen. And of course, in the month of April, we have a very, very big month. We have a lot of fights to talk about. We have the Tyson Fury versus Dillian White fight. We have the Gennady Triple G Golovkin versus Ryota Murata fight that I'm going to be talking about and breaking down as well. We have a few other fights, I believe, that are going to be happening in the month of April as well. Shakur Stevenson versus Oscar Valdez. I believe there also is the big fight, the big women's fight between that of Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano. And apparently, all in all, in recent news, now I'm not necessarily how true this is, but, we may very well see, after all, the George Kambosos versus Devin Haney unification match. Now, of course, George Kambosos, according to him, I don't know if this is necessarily confirmed. This is only a rumor because, of course, George Kambosos, he only recently said that he would face Devin Haney. I don't really know overall, how sincere that he is about facing Devin Haney, but we'll see what happens. And I somewhat get it because Devin Haney is a person to where he's almost like a Demetrius Bubo Andrade. Not only is he a little bit tricky when it comes down to it, but he's not a person that has the greatest of fan base. So George Kambosos, I think he would rather face almost anyone else that is decently popular in the lightweight division because, yes, even though Devin Haney is the champion, not only is he a little bit tough, but he's a person to where he's probably very decently high risk to face and somewhat low reward. I think all in all that Devin Haney, that he's a decent fighter, but I don't take a look at him overall as one of the top 10 or top 20 pound for pound fighters. And I know a certain amount of people would disagree. It's not that I don't think that he's a decent fighter, but with the certain points that I've heard other or channels make, such as Dante's Boxing Nation, for example, who we all know, of course, we all know what he's about and what fighters he usually stick up for. Of course, he tried to make the point that George Kambosos said if he loses to Devin Haney, that is not going to be that big of a deal because he's going to be looked at as losing to a future top 5 pound for pound star. And this is my opinion about Devin Haney, even though I think that he's a very decent boxer. I don't think that Devin Haney is ever going to be looked at as a future top 5 pound for pound star. I just don't really see that within him. I think that he's a very decent boxer. When I see him, what he really reminds me of is, well, I really don't even know what to compare him to. He reminds me almost of Floyd Mayweather Jr. If Floyd Mayweather Jr. maybe was at 10 or 20%. That's what he really reminds me of. It just is what it is. Don't get me wrong, Devin Haney I think is a very decently skilled fighter. And if this fight does happen next, what I will say is this. I think all in all that more than likely Devin Haney probably would have to be the favorite in my opinion for this fight. I think more than likely that Devin Haney probably would beat George Kambosos more than likely by decision. I don't know if Devin Haney necessarily has the punching power to stop a lot of the more elite fighters out there. That's not me saying that George Kambosos cannot win this fight, but I think that, to be quite honest with you, even though he did do better in the Teofimo Lopez fight than what a lot of us, of course, thought, I think the reason why he beat Teofimo Lopez is because I don't think Teofimo Lopez really took him all that seriously. I think the reason why he ended up beating Teofimo Lopez was the same reason why Andy Ruiz Jr. ended up defeating Anthony Joshua in the first fight. I think it's the same reason why Buster Douglas was able to defeat Mike Tyson. Basically, what am I saying here? It's almost pretty much the Buster Douglas effect, if you want to call it that. I think that George Kambosos is a very decent fighter. If you maybe even wanted to debate him as an A-grade fighter, you could. And whoever the winner of this fight is going to be, you certainly could debate them on your top 10 pound for pound list because they're going to be completely unified. And they already don't have a loss in their career like a Jamel Charlo. They've never lost to a B or C class fighter like what a Jamel Charlo did when it came down to it. And they somewhat unified a very decently talented division. Now, Devin Haney, for example, if he wins this fight, this is pretty much going to be hands down the only A-grade win in his career that he has. If George Kambosos ends up winning this fight over Devin Haney, I would probably have to rank him at least at number 8 pound for pound. In my view, if he were able to beat Devin Haney, well, I don't know if I'll go as far to say that I would rank him over Josh Taylor, but he would somewhat be within that same realm. So we'll see what happens. Do I believe personally that he is going to beat Devin Haney? No, personally I do not. I think all in all that George Kambosos is very decent, but it's not that I don't think that maybe he won't give Devin Haney trouble here and there. But, excuse me, I just think that Devin Haney, I think that Devin Haney has a very similar style to that of George Kambosos. I think that more than likely in that fight, they're more than likely going to try to counterpunch each other. I think that they're more than likely going to be on the back foot, with each other. And I think Devin Haney, I think that he's someone that is quicker. I think he's someone all in all that has a little bit better defense, even though he doesn't really have a super duper sharp defense. And you can see that in the Jojo Diaz fight. But in my view, if George Kambosos is going to win this fight, in my view, he's going to have to somewhat, I'm not going to say pressure Devin Haney a lot of the times, but he is going to have to mix it up with him here and there. He is going to have to be not afraid to punch with Devin Haney and get in there and mix it up. Because certain fighters, when it comes down to when they feel themselves being outboxed, or sometimes all in all when they feel themselves getting beat, they're afraid to mix it up in there. And I seen Jojo Diaz basically do that with Devin Haney. He pretty much was afraid to throw back with Devin Haney that whole entire fight. And if George Kambosos has any plans on winning that fight with Devin Haney, in my view, he's going to have to learn to go forward sometimes a little bit and throw it back with him. Not saying that sometimes you don't want to fight on the back foot. If you have him overall with a couple of good punches, maybe it's a good idea to go on the back foot. Another piece of advice that I would give George Kambosos Jr. is keep them damn hands up. Because George Kambosos nor Devin Haney, they're not always the biggest fans of keeping their hands up. And you can see that overall with a multitude of their fights. Because Devin Haney, if you take a look at him in the Jojo Diaz fight, and even in a couple of other fights, he can be hit. Because Devin Haney is not always the most defensively responsible. And it's the same thing with George Kambosos. But I believe that Devin Haney more than likely, probably, I would favor him this fight, probably at least 60-40, maybe 70-30 at most when it comes down to it. I think that it's a decent fight. I think that it's somewhat of a decently competitive matchup. But I think that more than likely Devin Haney is probably going to win this fight. We'll see all in all what happens. I did overall wanted to see the Vasily Lomachenko fight overall with that of George Kambosos. Now, a certain amount of people may ask, well, why would you, prefer that fight? Well, because I did want to see Vasily Lomachenko get his second chance to see all in all if he actually would be able to beat George Kambosos. Now, in my opinion, he more than likely would. And I think a certain amount of people, when they really take a look at George Kambosos, they really know overall who he is, which is basically, I'm not really going to compare him to a Buster Douglas, because I think that he was more skilled and more talented than what a Buster Douglas was. But pretty much what he is, he's pretty much another Andy Ruiz Jr., which basically is, in my view, you ended up getting the belts because your opponent, which was on top of the world at the time, he really did not take you seriously. And that opponent's hubris overall and overall overconfidence when it comes down to it really got the better of them. And I think that if Teofimo Lopez, if he would have had to get a better multitude of game plans and a better game plan, and I think that if he would have fought him better, I think all in all that Teofimo Lopez more than likely not only would have won the fight, I think that there would have been a very decent possibility that he could have stopped him later on. But Teofimo Lopez, not only did he show a certain amount of holes in his own game, but when it comes down to it, he also showed that George Kambosos or whatever, that he was a better fighter that night, and that he obviously did not take him nearly as seriously as what he should have. So we'll see all in all what ends up happening in this fight. I think that it's a very interesting fight. I think that it's a competitive matchup. I would have liked to see the Vasily Lomachenko fight because Vasily Lomachenko is turning 34 years old, I believe, this year. He's not going to get a whole lot more opportunities. Unfortunately for Mr. Vasily Lomachenko, excuse me, even though he is a terrific fighter, and I think all in all that he is one of the more skilled fighters on the planet, more than likely Vasily Lomachenko is probably going to turn into what is known as pretty much another Guillermo Rigondeaux, or someone overall within that plateau. Someone who may be, or one or two, or maybe even a more weight division champion, someone who is extraordinarily talented. But when you take a look at their career, some of the bigger matchups did elude them, unfortunately. Now, it's not that, Vasily Lomachenko didn't get any big wins in his career. He has wins over Nicholas Walters, Jorge Linares. He has wins over, Guillermo Rigondeaux, and a few others that I may not be mentioning. I feel like I'm forgetting one here. Gary Russell Jr. as well. I forgot about him. It's not that Vasily Lomachenko did not get any big wins in his career, but unfortunately, the ones overall that would be remembered the most, such as a Mikey Garcia and a Gervonta Tank Davis, unfortunately, more than likely, those fights are going to elude him. And more than likely, Vasily Lomachenko, he's probably going to be remembered as yet again another Guillermo Rigondeaux, or someone that was extraordinarily talented, but someone that, did not end up getting some of the bigger, more famous fights in their career. A lot of people, of course, who don't remember Guillermo Rigondeaux back in the day, he was asking for fights with Leo Santa Cruz. Leo Santa Cruz pretty much avoided him like the plague. It is what it is. And Gervonta Tank Davis and Mikey Garcia pretty much avoided Vasily Lomachenko like the plague as well. But unfortunately, certain history will remember overall, basically, who is the winners, and all in all, the certain fighters that may be burned out. So we'll see all in all what happens. Hopefully for Mr. Vasily Lomachenko, hopefully all in all his boxing career gets back on track, and hopefully for his sake, when it comes down to it, he's able to get on some of those bigger fights when he's still at a very decent point in his career. But we'll see all in all what happens. But this Devin Haney versus George Kambosos situation is a very interesting fight. I think all in all that if the fight does happen, I think that it is a great fight. I don't think that it would have been as big of a fight as the George Kambosos or Vasily Lomachenko fight. But when it comes down to it, it still is a big fight nonetheless. So it'll be a very, very interesting fight. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for me today. Once again, I'll be posting probably a little bit more, probably after this week. But we'll see what ends up happening. Anyways, that's really about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.